Roy, free will, consciousness, two core concepts in the philosophy of mind, understanding what we are as human beings. How do you see them articulating together? Is there a direction of causality? Do they overlap? How do they work?
When I started getting interested in free will and consciousness some years ago, I thought they were going to turn out to be essentially the same problem. And even some of my colleagues said, oh, as soon as you figure out one, you'll have solved the other. Over time, they've become more and more separate, but there's still a significant overlap. Consciousness is something perhaps that makes free will more possible. A peculiar feature of the brain is there's not a central controlling unit. The brain is the body's central control, but it doesn't have one. It has all these different parts, and even in them, information is just stored here and there. So when you have to act, do all the relevant parts of the brain that have information, do they get involved or not? Impulsive behavior, they might not. You'll be talking and there'll be a jar of potato chips or a bowl next, and you might just help yourself without thinking about it. It's because the stimulus activated one part of your brain. And the other parts that said, no, I shouldn't eat those, they're not good for me, or whatever, didn't get a chance to chime in and say no. So one function of consciousness is it sends out a signal to the whole brain, especially when you think about what you're going to do beforehand. You imagine the action, and all the little pieces, all the little parts of the mind and the brain that have relevant information can say, hey, I promised I wasn't going to do that, or hey, that was illegal, or would be illegal, or that's not good for me, or oh, I thought of a better way to do that, or this is something that I should do, and I should do it in some particular way. So that enables your action to be more a reflection of your entire self, a more matter of moral responsibility, and in some ways is freer, because if you're just responding to the impulse, you see food and you eat it, that's not as free as saying, do I want to eat this food? Does this food fit my religious beliefs, fit my diet, fit my plans, what I agreed to with my spouse or romantic partner? It's the same in a court of law. A premeditated action is treated differently than an impulsive crime, because the impulse, maybe the person didn't think it over, didn't get a chance to really consider the consequences. If you premeditated the crime, you thought about it in advance. And this is what consciousness is good for, is to allow all the different information you have for you to act as a moral being, as a legal being, as a responsible being. That's one of the key connections between consciousness and free will. It enables you to bring in more different perspectives and to really choose what befits yourself as a whole, rather than responding as part of a person.
Can free will itself, the different levels of free will, reflect on what consciousness is, such as the example you gave? If I'm consciously talking to you or on the phone, I'm actively engaged with my full focused consciousness, but if I'm eating potato chips, I mean, that is a lower level free will. It's something I am doing. It's nobody forcing me to do it. I'm not being controlled by a robot or anything else. So does that show different levels of free will, so that the different levels of free will reflect on different levels of consciousness? Is that a fair?
Well, things that you do without consciousness, we would use a broader term like agency. It's not my favorite term, but it's like being an agent who acts. I don't think you need the term free will for that. That much we'd have in all sorts of animals, squirrels deciding which tree to go up or where to bury a nut. It doesn't really ponder the options. It's a very impulsive sort of thing. And remember, we evolved from that. So we have a mentality to enable us to act in a non-free way. And I think free will, there are levels or degrees of it. It's on a continuum. It's not all or nothing.
Both in our individual experience and in the phylogenetics scheme.
Yes. In the phylogenetic, things emerged pretty much gradually, and not a complete continuum, but maybe in steps that make the next thing possible. So humans had to acquire a new way of making decisions and controlling their behavior in order to function in culture, in order to take advantage of this new kind of social life that we've invented. And so there is a level of consciousness that we share with all other animals. There's another level, perhaps, that is different, that is unique to humans.
In your experiments, do you ever think through this free will consciousness relationship? Is that something that's an active part of planning experiments to see how the two, you need to understand one in order to study the other?
In our lab work and experiments, we don't usually need to consider them both together. Because a laboratory experiment is often focused on a very specific, simple question. Those tend to be small. It's when you start to put them together to look for the big picture that you start to look for the relationships.
And what does it say about either philosophy or science that these two concepts kind of work together in some way? I mean, is there a bigger story that we can try to tell?
To me, the big story is this, and this is my view, but I've had it for 10 years, and I'm still looking for counterexamples, that I think we were made by nature, by evolution, and so all these human traits that we have, including free will and consciousness to the extent we have them, they are something that we evolved to ultimately to help us survive and reproduce. But we have a very different way of accomplishing that than other species. We create culture where we share information, where we follow rules, where we work together, where we exchange, where we reciprocate, where we understand each other as having a common mentality. That's where our species took off, with that use of culture. What I've been convinced for now for a decade or so is that most of the traits that make us human, that set us apart from other animals, are essentially adaptations to enable us to do culture, to create this new kind of social life. So free will, I think, and consciousness both helped us there. I think the origins of consciousness came with communication, with helping us understand others and share our information with them. And that enabled us to have more complicated social lives and social systems, which helped us survive and reproduce and still do that. And free will is for functioning in that too, a new kind of decision making.
If you had the so-called Venn diagram, say two big circles, one is consciousness and one is free will, how much do you see them overlapping?
Well, maybe 20%, 25.
Okay.
Action, please.
Consciousness 64, free will, key to consciousness. Roy, I've had two concepts in philosophy of mind which have bothered me for decades. Free will and consciousness. I'm not unique in this, I'm sure.
Sure.
How do they work together? Sometimes I think that free will is a key to understand consciousness. Other times I think, well, we have to assume consciousness to even be discussing free will. What's the relationship between the two?
I started out thinking that free will consciousness would be the keys, or to be almost the same problem, but they overlap, but they are somewhat distinct. Free will has something to do with choosing and choosing wisely. Without consciousness, you're limited perhaps to just the immediate present. Consciousness is the ability to simulate the future, to imagine things being different than they are, to make distant plans and to communicate these with others. They really improve what you can do with your ability to choose. And probably consciousness in that way helps transform the basic choosing capacity of any other animal into what humans would call free will. Is that enough?
I think so. Yeah, that's fine. Because you answered that completely before, so we'll. You just want us both to talk? Okay.
Just B-roll, but
All right. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, the idea of how